Welcome back to Farage with me, Christopher Hope. Now, the UK's population is set to rise to 72.5 million by mid-2032. That projection released today by the Office for National Statistics is driven almost entirely by net migration, with a 5 million increase within 10 years. Earlier on, I caught up with the usual presenter of this show, Nigel Farage, the UK Reform leader in Parliament, as he was going about his civic duties there. Here's what he had to say. With me now is Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK. Nigel Farage, 5 million more people arriving here, settling in here on a net basis between 2022 and 2032.
Well, remember that the population has increased by more than 10 million in the last 20 years. More than 10 million. And so this projection from the Office of National Statistics says another 5 million. And we're all supposed to just accept it, say nothing, don't complain, or we're nasty people. And what's worth remembering, there is a consensus in this building between both the Labour and the Conservative parties. Whatever they say at general elections, whatever promises they make, they're both more than prepared to accept this. And my argument now, for many, many years, has been this is diminishing the quality of life for virtually everybody in this country. Why do I say that? Well, just suppose the government does build 1.5 million homes. That won't even be enough to cope with the numbers coming in the next 5 years, let alone the shortfall that we have now. Have a think about GP services. New homes still being built everywhere, no new GP practices, waiting times for a doctor, beyond anything our parents and grandparents could ever even have dreamt of. Traffic, I mean, don't even get me started. Our quality of life is diminishing because of this. But here's the key point. The majority of those that are coming don't work. You know the argument for the last 20 years?
What's your evidence of that?
I'll give it you. Don't worry, Nigel, it's good for the economy because everybody comes in works. Of the last 3 million that entered the country from outside the European Union under the last Conservative governments, of the last 3 million, only 22% are working. So here's the real kicker. Not only is living our lives more difficult, it's directly making us poorer. There is no argument for continued mass migration, and yet I fear it's going to continue.
Number 10 say today, repeatedly, these figures are staggeringly high. Chris Philp for the Tory party, they say these figures can and must be stopped. You're sniggering because the Tories have failed over 14 years.
I'm sorry. It isn't just failure. We all fail in life. But you can't promise in 2010 in a manifesto, in 2015 and 2017 to reduce to tens of thousands a year. Then again in 2019 to say a big reduction. And then in 2023 net, 1 million people come. So no one's going to take Chris Philp seriously at all. And what was really interesting in the general election, whenever Keir Starmer laid out his key 5 or 6 objectives, legal immigration was never one of them.
He won't set a cap. He says caps don't work, but they are expecting a white paper on net migration in coming weeks. They might get it right. These are projections based on current party policy. If they can tighten it even further, the figures might come down from where they are now.
There is no indication the Labour Party will change the barriers, the limits to legal migration, let alone what's coming across the English Channel. There's no indication they intend to do any of this at all. I suspect numbers will continue at massive historic levels. And remember this, from Windrush until almost the millennium, net migration was at 30,000 a year. Now it's running at up to 1 million a year. That just gives you some sense of perspective of just how mad this has all become.
Well, what would you do at Reform UK? You fought the election on a net zero target. Net zero is 5 million arriving over the next 10 years, isn't it?
Net zero would mean, and by the way, not the loony net zero, which means we don't produce our own oil and gas. Net zero means no population increase as a direct result of migration.
That's a net figure, though. So you might have over the next 10 years, 5 million arriving, 5 million leaving.
That's possible. People will come, people will go. But we would significantly tighten up the rules around those that come. We want people that come to be working. And frankly, the idea that one person comes, gets a job, and the whole of the family come from India is just not acceptable.
But they're stopping that, aren't they? They're stopping families coming.
I've been hearing they're stopping that for over 10 years, and it hasn't stopped. And the numbers get bigger and bigger and bigger. We cannot afford it. It's damaging our way of life. We've got to get a grip.
It's difficult, though, isn't it? Because the answer is getting more off benefits, more UK workers into the workforce, and it's cheaper to bring them from overseas. And that's the reality. And you haven't been in government. You haven't faced that challenge, have you? You're offering, if I may, easy solutions from the sidelines.
It's cheaper for the employer. It's not cheaper for the taxpayer when they bring so many dependents with them and put so much pressure on the health service and every other form of public service. And look, here is the point. We do not need low-skilled migration into Britain. Do we need some brilliant engineers to come in and help us with AI? Perhaps we do, although actually we have many of our own good ones who are currently leaving. The big kicker to all of this is you have to break the gap of welfare dependency. If you're on benefits, a big range of benefits, and you go to work and work for more than 16 hours a week, you lose your benefits and you're worse off. That's where the tax breaks need to come. That's where the change needs to come. And frankly, we're going to have to get tougher with those who choose unemployment as a long-term option.
Nigel Farage, thank you. Nigel Farage, Reform UK leader there, with a challenge to the government to tackle the benefits bill, and you might tackle the migration bill too. OK, let's get the thoughts now on that from our panel. Sir Ranil Jayawardena, the former Tory MP and Cabinet Minister, and the journalist and former Press Secretary to the late Lib Dem leader Paddy Ashdown, Joe Phillips. Welcome to you both to Farage tonight. To you first, Sir Ranil Jayawardena. It's on you, this, isn't it? I mean, this is a figure from 2022 to 2032, an increase of nearly 5 million. A lot of that time you were not dealing with, as a government, as a Tory party, with net migration.
Well, first of all, it'd be remiss of me to say that we've really got to drill down on some of these facts. And I'm really pleased that in that interview you actually did probe some of what Nigel Farage was saying. Because, whilst we might both want there to be immigration controls, we also want Britain to lead the world in all sorts of areas, like higher education. It's a really good thing if Britain is able to impart her soft power through universities, teaching the brightest and the best from all around the world, and they will form part of these figures, I'm sure. Also, really important to say, to sort of drill down to some of the economic figures, and we've got to make sure that the economy is growing and is going to have the high-wage jobs of the future. What Rachel Reeves is doing right now, what the government are doing right now, is going to depress the economy. So the GDP per capita, regardless of what happens with immigration, is likely to fall. And then the last point, which it should, I'm sure viewers will be very mindful of, is when COVID struck, a lot of people left this country to return to their country of origin, and post-COVID, other people have come back. So there are lots of different factors. We
are looking forward here, aren't we, Sir Ranil? We're looking forward in 2032, and the average number arriving is 340,000 a year. I mean, that's not is that acceptable to you?
No.
You seem to be justifying it.
No. But I want to be clear that there are a range of different factors that affect this. It is not as simple as saying that people are coming here and looking for work. There are a range of factors, including higher education, including people filling jobs that they used to have that weren't present during COVID that have come back. And as we grow an economy, we should absolutely, as you rightly probed in that interview, we should encourage more people to get back to work. And so, very encouraging noises from Labour on cutting the benefits bill. Let's see if they do it.
Yes, Joe Phillips, is hard, isn't it? I mean, the Lib Dems had a go when they're in the coalition. It's hard making people get them off benefits into work. The easiest solution is net migration.
Well, yes, although one of the interesting figures in this report from the ONS is the number of people who are going to be elderly.
Yes.
And when you look at the cost, and when you look at the fact that, pensions takes up most of the benefits bill, there are going to be big questions about, whether we can afford the triple lock. I suspect the answer is no.
That's a doubling in over 85
exactly.
to 3.3 million by 2047.
Yeah, exactly. And who is going to look after them if we haven't by then had yet another report to tell us what we already need to do.
Yeah. So are the Lib Dems content about net migration levels?
I think the problem is, and I think Ranil's absolutely right, you need to drill down into it. When you say the bald figures, it makes it sound like they're all coming over on the boats. And I think, when you look at the fact that just this evening, Cardiff University has announced 400 full-time job cuts. Yeah. Universities across the country are suffering because of the lack of international students. And, of course, immigration went up through the roof post-Brexit, and a lot of the people who were backwards and forwards from Europe, they're
the issue of family visas in that interview there, I did say to Nigel Farage, well, actually, the government is dealing with that. The government, for its part, says that these figures are staggeringly high. They won't put a cap on it. Your party say it would put a cap on it, although you've tried and failed for 14 years on the issue of the cap. Should they impose a cap? Should the government be brave and do that? Because Whitehall responds to instruction.
Yeah. Absolutely. As you say, the Conservative Party has said that we would have a cap.
But you failed four or five times.
Well, in fairness, we did make progress before COVID to reduce migration. Clearly, it has gone up since COVID. But I think there's one really interesting point from Jo, actually, on older people. She's absolutely right to say that there is the need to care for our older people. But the biggest thing, the elephant in the room that no one really wants to talk about in government is the fact we don't have enough children in this country. We've got to get our birth rate up. We've got to incentivise and support families to have more children, because it's only by having a growing population domestically can we grow our economy, look after our older people and reduce levels of migration in the long run.
Or train people, homegrown people,
well, that's
to
the challenge,
do the
surely.
jobs.
Off benefits
yes,
into work.
You know, and to be honest, Ranald, 14 years.
But you've got to have the next generation to train. Yes, and at the moment we don't. We've got a declining population.
In 14 years there was no increase in training in social care and nursing and all of those.
But we've got a declining population to train. That's my point.
Well, I know.
You know, we are not meeting our replacement
rate. Don't need
rate.
to be replaced by people coming from abroad.
Well, thanks to my panel and to Nigel Farage, of course, to my panel tonight, Ranald Jar Warden and Jo Phillips.